go, fun's getting low. Winter is a coming fast and colder than the last. Pity for me, cold as can be. When breezes blow with ice and snow, no wonder then I sing time and again.
This is Sparky on Ice, the coldest podcast on the internet. Today is October 25th, and I have been on ice for 21 days. Welcome back, everyone. It's been a very interesting week for us here on ice. So I guess I'll just get right into it. Starting with where we left off, had a very successful trivia night. It was a Halloween base and included questions about a lollipop licking machine that everyone was rather interested in. It was a little shorter than normal because I'd planned on using the same questions from last year, so I figured I was all set. I'd saved a copy on the hard drive that I left down here, but the day before trivia, I thought it'd be a good idea to go over the slides and make sure I knew the content. I was surprised to discover that the saved version was only the first section, so I'd spent about 6 hours Tuesday night researching and writing all new slides for the remaining sections. At 11, I figured 5 rounds would just have to do. But it all went well. Everyone had a fun time. And then they got some extra time to sit around and talk at the bar afterwards. I even had time to put in some Street Fighter 2 on the multicade. So that was fun. But like I said, been a good week. We got a lot done at work. We set up a town at Phoenix Runway for the KBA flight crew coming from Canada. That's Ken Boric Air. They do all the small plane flights on the continent. They fly the smaller skied planes like the ones you see in the movies going to Alaska or other remote snowy locations. I think their biggest plane is something like 24 seats and no cargo space. They fly to all the field camps, and this year we'll be providing all the trips to the South Pole. We also set up some isolation rooms in one of our dorms in case COVID does hitch a ride on someone and show up on station. That all got powered up yesterday on Saturday. So that's quite an accomplishment for my team since there's only 5 of us. So we're getting a lot done. They're a really good crew. And next week we're probably going to start on prepping the lights for the other skiway since we're not going to have regular flights in and out. They're just going to stage in Christchurch for emergencies. I also got to DM my first game in D&D on ice, and that was a ton of fun. We're playing the Lost Mines of Phandelver, and the party made it through the first part with only 1 death. They did well, but the dice was certainly not in their favor at a couple crucial points in the battle. But not to worry, I've worked out a way to res that party member as a one-time thing. Yeah, no more freebies after this one. Gonna go back and play tomorrow. We'll do section 2 and see how it goes. So far, everybody's having fun with it, and I think we'll just keep going. But the bad news is that we are back in COVID level yellow, which means no karaoke, no trivia. The bars are closed again. We're on a set eating schedule again, and we have to wear masks everywhere. And this is really frustrating because we had such a good time in green, but now we have to go back to yellow. It's the price we paid for keeping us COVID free. And honestly, it's not actually that bad. And one of the benefits is that usually after the planes come in, we get a case of the crud going around, which is like an upper respiratory infection that everybody gets. But this year, so far, we haven't had any cases of the crud that I know of. And usually it gets around pretty fast when someone has it. It does have its benefits. And when I posted this earlier and asking for some questions, Richard asked a couple questions, and he said, what triggers level yellow? So level yellow is what happens when we either get new people on station or we get unclean cargo. So what happened this time is the Canadian team that I talked about earlier, one of their planes showed up with the Italians with them who are going up to another station. So they're being held in temporary isolation for now, but we're still in code yellow. And as far as why not the radio shows, well, we had a discussion about that. And one of the reasons is we talked directly into a microphone. And as you know, COVID is spread via droplets. And those droplets are likely to get on a microphone. And then we touch things, we touch the microphone. So they determined that the microphone could be a vector for disease, and that the radio station being enclosed would also be an issue. So, no radio. I mean, it stinks. And we are looking at some options to allow us to do radio, like personal microphones and a couple other things. I found out that you can put like a cellophane over the microphone. It wouldn't be the best quality sounding, but it would be a good protection against COVID if everybody used their own cellophane. So that's a plus. We're looking into that, and we'll see what happens. But yeah, that's pretty much it for that. And I guess I'll get into some history. And we are at the Shackleton and the Nimrod expedition. After being sent home early from the 1903 Discovery expedition due to poor health, Shackleton returned to England and began working with the government on how to rescue the Discovery. He helped outfit the rescue ship Terra Nova and an Argentine ship setting out to rescue the Swedish Antarctic expedition, which had gotten stuck at the same time. Then he tried his hand at politics in 1906, and that did not go well for him. Finally, in 1907, he presented plans to the Royal Geographical Society, and those were his plans for the Antarctic expedition, the details of which, under the name British Antarctic Expedition, were published in the Royal Geographical Society newsletter. The aim was the conquest of both the geographical South Pole and South Magnetic Pole. Shackleton then worked hard to persuade others of his wealthy friends and acquaintances to contribute, including Sir Philip Lee Brocklehurst, who added 2,000 pounds, roughly 157,000 pounds today, to secure a place on the expedition. Arthur Campbell McKellar and Guinness Baron Lord Ivy, whose contribution was secured less than 2 weeks before the departure of the expedition ship Nimrod. On January 1st, 1908, Nimrod set off on the British Antarctic expedition from Lyttelton Harbour, New Zealand. Shackleton's original plan had included using the old Discovery base in McMurdo Sound to launch his attempts to the South Pole and South Magnetic Pole. Before leaving England, he had been pressured to assure Scott that he would not base himself in the McMurdo area, which Scott was claiming for his own field work. Shackleton reluctantly agreed to look for winter quarters at either Barrier Inlet, which Discovery had briefly visited in 1902, or King Edward VII Land. To conserve coal, the ship was towed 1,650 miles by steamer Cunha through the Antarctic ice after Shackleton had persuaded the New Zealand government and the Union Steamship Company to share the cost. The ship headed to the eastern sector of the Great Ice Barrier, arriving there on 21 January 1908. They found that the barrier inlet had expanded to form a large bay in which there were hundreds of whales, which led to immediate christening of the area as the Bay of Whales. It was noted that ice conditions were unstable, making it impossible to create a safe base there. An extended search for an anchorage in King Edward VII Land proved equally fruitless, so Shackleton was forced to break his promise to Scott and set sail for McMurdo Sound, a decision which, according to the second officer Arthur Harbund, was dictated by common sense in view of the difficulties of ice pressure, coal shortages, and the lack of any nearer known base. Nimrod arrived at McMurdo Sound on January 29th, but was stopped by ice 16 miles north of Discovery's old base at Hut Point. After considerable weather delays, Shackleton's base was eventually established at Cape Royds, about 24 miles north of Hut Point. The party was in high spirits despite difficult conditions. Shackleton's ability to communicate with each man kept the party happy and focused. Shackleton had brought ponies for transport and a motor car especially adapted for Antarctic conditions. The ponies did not fare well in the journey and were in poor condition. In fact, one had been injured and had to be shot during the journey, and another was shot on arrival. The temperature was now consistently cold, below 20 degrees Celsius, and the Nimrod had left the landing party and headed back towards New Zealand on February 22nd. Scientific reading and observations began immediately, particularly meteorological and biological of the seas through cracks in the ice. A party of 6 succeeded in the first ascent of the 13,000-foot nearby volcano Mount Erebus. The base then embarked on the mundane chores of winter life, livening them with distractions wherever possible, but the main life slowed and chores filled the time available. Cold and wind making simple activities become much more involved and time-consuming. There were, of course, tensions to be expected of such disparate characters living closely together. Another party, led by Edward David and Mackay and Mawson would set out to reach the southern magnetic pole, itself a 1,260-mile journey. The latter party had no experience of Antarctic exploration at all and did not have the help of dogs or ponies. They did, however, have the motor car taken on the expedition and used it to establish two depots, 10 and 15 miles from winter base. Ironically, the car suffered from overheating of the engine, and the men had to wait in the cold to cool down before it could run. They set out on September 25th, 1908, and were soon running out of food, having to ration themselves quite strictly by early November. They soon learned the lessons of Antarctica from brushes with disasters. Each of the men and the sledge fell or very nearly fell into present crevasses. Snow blindness, sunburn, and frostbite made traveling all the more difficult, but by January 15, 1909, they reached the southern magnetic pole. Photographs were taken and the Union flag posted. The polar party of Frank Wild, Ernest Shackleton, Eric Marshall, Jameson Adams, led by Shackleton, left on a fine day in October 29, 1908. Quote, "Only those who have experienced Antarctica directly can appreciate the feeling of exhilaration and excitement that setting out on a journey on a fine day in the Antarctic spring can give." That's from Shackleton. They had ponies on this journey, but they became weak and caused problems as much as they helped solve them. Adams was kicked under the knee and the bone exposed on the first day out. Rations were very short and the men soon became very hungry. The weakest pony was shot on November 21st, some of the meat eaten, and the rest depoted. On November 22nd, they passed the previous further south pole point reached by Robert Scott. The trip Shackleton was also on in 1902. A further 2 ponies were shot soon afterward. This freed up some of the food and men began eating pony maize. Christmas was celebrated with some carefully held back treats, plum pudding, brandy cigars, and a spoonful of creme de menthe each. By December 27th, they were on the polar plateau at an altitude of 10,200 feet with the wind against them. Suffering from a lack of food, with hands and feet almost to the point of frostbite, Shackleton was aware of the worsening situation, knowing they had only a limited time in the light of their rations and their physical state. He battled southward winds and blizzards. Sometimes the blizzards kept them in their sleeping bags all day. On January 9th, they reached their furthest south point, which was just 97 miles from the pole. A flag was planted and photographs taken, and they turned around and began to head home. On the journey back, the wind they had battled against was now behind them. They used a sail on the sled and rushed across the ice, making up to 29 miles a day. They were able to obtain food from the depots they had laid on the outward journey, including the meat from the ponies. So by contrast to the earlier weeks, were well fed and relatively content. They reached Hut Point to find a note saying the Nimrod was sheltering nearby. Burning the magnetic hut to provide a signal summoned the Nimrod that they were soon safe aboard. They had walked 1,700 miles. Shackleton returned to Hero. He was knighted and made a commander of the Royal Victorian Order. He also began planning for his next expedition to the Antarctic. And that is history for this week. Next week, we'll talk more in depth about the Mawson trip to the South Pole. I guess it's time for a couple of questions. In addition to the ones from Richard earlier, I got a couple more from my new Reddit account from Breaking Those Cankles. First question, is it true about some interesting dialects popping up among some of the camps down there? This refers to a video that Breaking Those Cankles shared with me about how some British station had done a test about vowel shifting while wintering over. I'm not sure how prevalent that is anywhere else. I mean, 11 people is a pretty small sample size. But we do kind of have our own language down here, much like any other isolated population. We speak a lot of times in acronyms and local euphemisms. So one of the examples I give is this thing we call winter brain, which tends to happen in situations like we're in, where you tend to get, I guess, addle-brained a little bit. You get a little bit confused. You forget things easily. You're not 100%, and it just takes you a little longer to figure things out, simply because your brain is not functioning at 100%. Obviously, I've got a little winter brain here, but it's just stuff like that. We do come up with our own things to say, and like I said, acronyms are huge down here. just simply because it's a former military base. His other question, also heard you are basically locked up for 6 months out of the year because of the cold. Can't go outside, right? Not exactly. Even at the South Pole, they get to go outside in the middle of winter. In fact, they do it quite a bit because things break. Now, occasionally you can't go outside, say during a Con 1, or if it's like negative 75, you don't want to go outside. But for the most part, like here on station, I'll walk to my office every day, and or we'll have to go from the dorms to the galley every day. So even if it's cruddy outside, we still go, unless it's a Con 1. We'll still make our way over to the galley for food or coffee or whatever. And I think that's about all I've got for this week. If you want to ask me some questions, you can get me on Facebook or Twitter or my new Reddit. All of them are Sparky on Ice, just to make things easier. And I will talk to you guys next week.
I feel the snow and sleet without a pair of winter shoes to warm my freezing